I'm the president of the West Hartford African American Social and Cultural Organization. Excited to join you again for what I believe is our fourth West Hartford Community Conversations. Again, joined with our partners, Jen Matos with the Noah Webster House and West Hartford Historical Society. And producing the show for us again is Jennifer Evans from the West Hartford Community Interactive. So we're really excited to have you here to talk about the Juneteenth celebration that's coming up in West Hartford. For some historical context, this is very exciting that West Hartford is celebrating its second annual Juneteenth, and Adrienne Billings-Smith from Concerned Parents of Color of West Hartford is going to talk more about that. But for context, it's very exciting the way it's playing out this time because about 25 years ago, WHAASCO introduced the Martin Luther King Day event in West Hartford. And we have members of WHAASCO who were here when that happened. And that event, as often the MLK Day around the country was not warmly received by the town of West Hartford, which is sort of hard to believe when you think about our town today and so many great things that our town is doing. The historical perspective is that it wasn't quite this way 25 years ago. And as you guys know now, it's a wonderful event that involves so many people in our community. But Juneteenth, on the other hand, is so warmly received that Adrienne is going to tell you what an amazing day that is planned for Juneteenth. For some historical context, if you don't know what Juneteenth is, Juneteenth celebrates the time when a general from the Union Army went into the state of Texas. I don't know if it was a state then, but the territory of Texas, let's say, after the Civil War, and notified the enslaved people that they were free, which was announced, I think, in 1863 as part of the Emancipation Proclamation. But when the proclamation was announced, it didn't become effective in the succession states until or unless the Union Army won the war. But even after they won the war, no one told the enslaved people in Texas that they were free, and they wouldn't have known because they weren't treated that way until a general from the Union Army came. It's recognized as a celebratory event, which is consistent with the appropriation that the African American community has often done, where you take something that could be otherwise considered tragic and turn it into a celebratory event, because it was in fact celebratory at the time when the enslaved people learned that they were free. Something that when I lived in Texas, Juneteenth was very well understood, celebrated in so many parts of Texas, had pretty strong traditions. But until recently, as I understand it, was very little known in New England. So it's exciting to see another historical event from Black history starting to become known, and for our town to embrace it and make sure that many, many more people know about it. It's along with the tradition of, we were talking earlier about the Tulsa Massacre, which had a couple of documentaries recently. So many people had never heard of the Tulsa massacres, which is very, very significant. And the list goes on. And as I said in a previous community conversation, there are events that many state legislators have legislated that you cannot teach, like the 1619 Project. There's legislation about 3 states. There's legislation even as close to us as New Hampshire that was introduced, though I don't think it passed, that said you cannot teach anything about systemic racism in a public school. So it's great when we can actually get this history known, and I think we're all better for it when we understand the history. So we're going to have an exciting event today. We're going to talk about so many great things that we're doing here in West Hartford that are related or are part of the Juneteenth celebration. That includes the renaming of Goodman Green, and it also includes an MLK mural that will go up in Town Center. So before we get into it, we're going to have Jen Matos introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Earl. Well, it's again such a pleasure to be doing a conversation with WHAASCO and with West Hartford Community Interactive and with all of our awesome panelists today. And it's really exciting for the town to be having its second annual Juneteenth celebration, this time kind of bigger than ever. So you'll be learning all about it. It's a very exciting time to be in West Hartford. So it's my privilege to introduce all of our panelists today. And I'm going to get started with Matt Conway. So Matt Conway is with Rise Up. He is a dynamic, creative leader with over 10 years of leadership experience in large global corporations and grassroots community organizing and developing through the Rise Up group. In addition to creating public art since 2015, Matt's corporate experience has spanned from finance, product development, strategy, and to regulatory compliance. And so Matt will be talking more about the exciting MLK mural that's going up on the side of the library. Next, I'd like to introduce Liz Devine. So if you had a student who attended Hall High School, you probably, you'd probably recognize Mrs. Devine. Liz is a recently retired and very much beloved history teacher from Hall High School. She actually just completed 6 years of service on the Noah Webster House and West Hartford Historical Society Board of Trustees. So we're very grateful to her service, to West Hartford history. She's been motivated by issues related to social justice for many years, but particularly in 2018, she co-founded the Witness Stones Project with the town historian, Dr. Tracy Wilson, and retired teacher Liz DeMillo. She and her partners have been researching enslaved people in West Hartford, conducting professional development with 8th grade public school teachers, and having students learn and write the stories, and then installing the stones to commemorate those lost to history. This opens the door to our witness of the history of slavery on which this town was founded. So we'll be hearing more from Liz about how the Witness Stones Project really uncovered the true meaning of the name of Goodman Green. Next, I'd like to introduce Judy Schmidt. Excuse me. Judy Schmidt was the moderator of the First Church of Christ, UCC, West Hartford, for the past 2 years, and she just recently turned over the gavel. She is active in church leadership and with the Handbell Choir. She recently retired from United Technologies Corporation, where she worked in human resources, focusing most recently on employee data privacy and export control issues. She and her husband, Terry, have lived in West Hartford for 25 years, where they raised their 3 children. Next, I want to introduce Dottie Stone. Dottie Seldon Stone grew up in West Hartford and in First Church, along with her family and many cousin, aunts, and uncles. She and her husband, George, raised their family on Long Island, but during those years returned often to West Hartford for visits with all the West Hartford family. 15 years ago, they moved back to West Hartford, and Dottie has again become an active member of First Church. She and her husband, George, are semi-retired from their tax and accounting business, which serves a small number of clients. And last but not least, I want to introduce Adrienne Billings-Smith. Adrienne Billings-Smith is a local West Hartford attorney and flight attendant who hails from the Sunshine State, where she also played collegiate basketball for the University of Central Florida, and coached college basketball at Wagner College and Marshall University. Adrienne is the founder and president of Concerned Parents of Color of West Hartford. And that's an organization whose mission is to advocate for change in education, legislation, and representation in West Hartford. Her vision is to build and sustain an open, honest dialogue with leaders of West Hartford and beyond. Through her leadership at Concerned Parents of Color, the organization has played a pivotal role in the renaming of a West Hartford town green, which was named after an enslaver, Timothy Goodman, and has now officially been renamed Unity Green. So she's going to tell us a lot more about that. Thank you, everyone, and take it away, Adrienne.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on, and we're really excited. The Juneteenth celebration is about community, It's about celebrating us getting over the hump of the pandemic, about reuniting with one another. We have a lot of stuff in store for the day. We have Alvin Carter and Friends of the World, drumming, African drumming, who will bring us in and start the show. We have student performers, um, uh, theater performers that will be doing, her name is T'Challa Williams, she'll be doing a reenactment performance. We have hula hoop and jump roping contests, activities books, painting, and an important part of Juneteenth, as Earl was saying, is to make it a celebratory event. So we have a community picnic plan. That's the main draw. Dora will be offering pre-ordered meals that they'll deliver on the day of the event, which is awesome. Shake Shack will be out there giving away custard. Hopefully it's a sunny day. We are all doing our dance to make sure that nothing happens and we're there and it's beautiful. And we have the MLK mural unveiling. On the 20th, we have the Unity Green service and dedication. We have a lot of people. Our keynote speakers this year, we're so excited to have Lorna Thomas Farquharson and her daughter Juliana, just to give the generational piece of that growth and that, how would I say it, to watch someone who's so powerful and so pivotal in our community as our co-chair of the Board of Education, and her daughter who began Students Against Racism. These are two important people to us, and it'll be so amazing to watch them speak. We want to ensure that our sponsors are being thanked. We have the first 200 people get water bottles sponsored by MDC, and we thank them. We'll have Avery Strawberry Soda. When you read up on the history of Juneteenth, which I hope you go and you join in our page on West Hartford Community Juneteenth Celebration, we have facts on there to let you know what Juneteenth means and all the performers and everything that's going on. And I'm super excited. So thank you for giving me a moment to talk about that. And I'm also really excited about the dedication to Unity Green. We've been talking about it for a while. It's been a buzz around town for a while. And I'm so humbled and grateful to be in partnership with everyone that's on this panel that helped the transition and help advocate for the renaming of the Green. Especially to Miss Dottie for coming forward and wanting to do something that's related to her own personal experiences. So I think everyone here, it couldn't be done without all of you, advocating for it. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Adrienne, and thank you for all the great work you've done that has really inspired what has led up to this great celebration that we're looking forward to on June 19th. So on the morning of June 19th, which is the actual day that the Juneteenth celebration is historically celebrated, or at least honored, though you might celebrate it on different days, we get to actually celebrate it on the actual day that commemorates the enslaved people learning that they were free. And in that morning, we will have another Witness Stone Project dedication. Liz Devine is one of the founders of the Witness Stone Project. So Liz, if you can just tell us, what should we expect to experience that morning?
Yes. Hi, thank you for having me. We are really excited. This is our fourth installation. And we started in a very small way, 4 years ago, and now it's really grown a lot. And I think a lot of this, our growth is also part of the whole community celebration, which is great. The program was founded to honor the contributions of enslaved folks in West Hartford who really helped to build this community, and to say their names and make sure that we want to shift people's gaze. And I think the entire Juneteenth celebration is a way of shifting the community gaze in terms of racial justice in this community. So we are going to have members of the schools, kids who have been studying some of the enslaved people, we've been to every eighth grade classroom in the town, and we also worked with KO and Solomon Schechter. So we're having representatives of the schools read their poetry, read their letters, share their projects about the enslaved people. And then we have other members of our community who joined our community online. We had two online forums actually for members of the community to learn about Written Stones project and enslaved people. We have 15 stones that we're putting in the ground on Juneteenth, and so some adults who are in those community forums are going to also join us, and we'll be telling people about who those enslaved folks were, and then we're going to be basically putting the stone marker in the ground in the cemetery next to the other. I think we must have 10 now. No, we have 20. We had 22, so we're going to have another 15 to that. But the Witness Stones project is more than just the installation. That's obviously the culmination. Our real goal is to shift students' gaze, teachers' gaze, the community gaze, but it's also not only, we're asking people not just to witness, but to actually do something. And that's why what the students have done in their projects is really interesting, including next Tuesday, there's going to be a town council meeting where students are going to advocate to rename New Street, which is one street that doesn't really have a name, to name that street in memory of one of the enslaved people that they studied. So we really want students to step up and not only be a witness, but to do something. And so that's an interesting part of our program. And Tracy, Denise, and I were all teachers, and so we think this program is unusual in a way because not only do we do research about the enslaved people in this community, but we also work with students. And we think in terms of sustainability, that's the most important thing, is to share this information with students so that they can go on and work in their communities and also shift the gaze wherever they go, in college and in the communities that they live in. So we're excited. We're excited about it.
It seems to be making a difference. In fact, I had not known about one of the enslaved people. I can't remember the name. It might have been Pot, that they want to name the street after. But apparently that person was able to, I think, purchase his own freedom, and actually was very, very productive and successful for the time. And I guess there was at least a couple of people that had similar stories where they were able to somehow earn their freedom and then become productive in our town.
Absolutely. Well, Pelignot is the gentleman you're speaking of, and he actually was so important. He was actually he worked for it's going to come to me. Don't mind me. I'm having one of those moments. It'll come to me. Anyway, he worked as for the commissary during the Revolutionary War, and he did all the work on this guy's farm. Wadsworth, Daniel Wadsworth. Daniel Wadsworth was the richest individual in town, and Pelignot was the person who ran his farm. And then he does become free, and he also becomes a Negro governor. He is a very prominent guy. This year, not only did we investigate Pelignot, but we investigated several other individuals who we were able to trace. So we do our work through probate records and wills and inventories and census material. We were able to trace 5 people who actually became free, and we were able to trace them after they were enslaved here in the West Division of Hartford, and found them in Hartford. And also one couple actually moved to New York. We were able to trace that their movement. So we're starting to find more and more information about people not at the middle of the 18th century, but a little bit later now. And that's freedom is, we call it the disentangling of slavery from slavery. It's not a straight line from being an enslaved person to a free person, as you can imagine. There's a lot that people have to go through, in order to find their true freedom. So we're able to do some of that research as well, and tell kids about our investigations. So we found that to be important. The other thing I want to mention is this year we also did one other. We also found one other in our investigation, one other person who actually happened to serve in the Revolutionary War. And while he was serving as an enslaved person, we found the papers of him being passed from one person to another, one enslaver to another. So it does really beg the question for us to think about what it means to be free and what it means to fight for freedom. So we're uncovering lots of, lots of the history that is complicated, as you can imagine. But we really believe we really feel strongly that students can handle this. They can engage with the material. And when you come to the ceremony, you'll see they do some just absolutely beautiful work. The poems they've written, the quilts they've made, the podcasts that they've created. It's really quite amazing.
One of the questions I thought about asking, but I think you've sort of answered, is what's the impact? And I will tell you, the young people just have been unbelievable. That not only are they learning and being inspired on how to learn and how to gain perspective beyond what's just in the typical textbook, they're teaching. They're going to town hall, advocating for change in our community and teaching. Like, a lot of people didn't know about Black governors or Negro governors,
Right.
which effectively was a system that Black people had set up to elect leaders, despite the circumstances. So these are things that are really growing out of your project, which, I'm very much about agency, but I think it's not just, we're not just learning about enslaved people, we're learning about their agency as well. And it's really, really wonderful that you guys are doing that. West Hartford is one of the leading communities. There's other communities in Connecticut that are doing this, but I think West Hartford stands out as one that's doing it well.
Well, I have to say, I'm also proud to say that we're the community that's working with the public school students. Many of the other communities are working with private schools, but the town of West Hartford is dedicated that every 8th grade student will study about enslaved people in the West Division in the curriculum. So that's big. That's really
outstanding.
Important.
But listen, we are so fortunate to have you and Tracy Wilson and all of the other people who have been active and engaged in the Witness Stone Project. Just a wonderful, wonderful contribution to our community. So thank you so much, Liz.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Matt, who I will call a relative newcomer to the West Hartford community, but coming in with a bang. Matt, tell us more about the MLK Mural Project and Rise Up.
Yeah, thank you, Earl. So, I do have some roots back in West Hartford. My dad's side of the family grew up there. Grandma still lives on Cumberland Road.
All right.
But she actually does not like murals. She's very old school. So, this has been such an incredible experience, incredible team, to work with in West Hartford. Not only on the mural, but just like seeing the entire Juneteenth event come together and, the regular meetings and the passion that everyone has, it's beautiful. We Rise Up is an organization that was founded as a youth development and mentoring program in Hartford and has since grown into creating meaningful and inclusive public art across the state. And so in January, we launched the MLK 39 Racial Equity Mural Tour as a way to, tell the story of different communities across the state, and while honoring and sending, positive messages about the civil rights leaders that have, not only local, but also national. So it's been an incredible learning experience for me, and I hope for everyone that's been engaged in this process, learning about all these incredible people in our communities. In West Hartford alone, I think we were going through a list of names of over 50 people, and we had to leave out a lot of people who should be honored, with something like this, but it just shows how much more work we have to do to, recognize the history that's taken place in our state and nationally. So this has been a real honor of a project to work on. Very excited to see this take shape in West Hartford. And what's so unique about the West Hartford mural is it truly is telling a story. You know, from Briscoe's hands all the way to MLK and Dr. Bernard Lafayette, Ella Baker, wrapping around front to, you know, people who are still alive and continuing to pave the path, like, you know, Tammy Exum, your wife, and, you know, other notable figures that are, you know, really doing amazing things. So it's been great honor to be a part of this.
Matt, what do you think will be the impact, or what do you want the impact to be, and what do you think will be the impact of not just the mural in West Hartford, but the 39 murals that'll go up around the state?
Yeah, well, one thing is, you know, Connecticut is one of the most segregated states in the country. And a lot of the towns that these murals are going up in still struggle greatly. You know, it's not as progressive and welcoming to people of color as West Hartford is, or some of the other communities. You know, there's a real negative stigma to this day that racism is alive and well, and people, you know, Black people, brown people feel that racism just when they walk down the street. And so and they have to walk by, you know, statues of former slave owners, walk by statues of, you know, Christopher Columbus, who, you know, massacred an entire continent. But by, you know, doing public art in this way, it almost starts reversing that narrative and changing the environment for everyone to feel welcome and inclusive living in their community. And hopefully it gives voice to folks who may not have always, you know, felt like they had a voice in that town. Now they are a part of a process that's going to be creating a story for that town that's going to last, you know, 20 years. So
That's great. I mean, I got to imagine that if you come in and see this beautiful mural with all the messages, that it tells you right up front what kind of community that you're in, and how the community has embraced this is just really, really wonderful, and how it's come together. So we're really, really lucky to have it. Another thought is, again, MLK Day and MLK celebrations, they were hard fought. And that was, you know, that was through protest, it was through boycott. You know, tell us what you think it means in terms of how easy, or maybe not so easy, it was to do this around the state of Connecticut and in West Hartford.
You know, the work we're doing with this public art, while we have, you know, some challenges and some, you know, people who don't want to see this in their community, the work we're doing here doesn't come close to comparing what was done, you know, to pave the way for the community like West Hartford to thrive. This has been a relatively easy process, and it's been, you know, amazing to see communities come together. You know, there's always going to be your negative folks in any town, but we're really seeing people from across the aisles coming together and having conversations. You know, Republican and Democrat town councils unanimously voting to have this type of public art in their community. So I've been really inspired by the light it's shining on the goodness, you know, rather than this is a hard fought battle, you know, uphill to try and get these done. I think it's really shining some positivity in communities.
Okay. Hey, we actually have a question from the audience that came in for you, Matt. So let me read it. It said, how were you able to have community members assist in the painting of the mural? Was it painted by number? That's a joke, I guess. Painted by number.
Yeah. So the mural, I would say, is like 5% tops done. We literally have half of a blue coat done up the wall, which the community did come out on May 22nd. We had, you know, probably 15, 20 volunteers. A lot of youth came out. Some students from Kingswood, Oxford. Adrienne's son was out there with one of his friends. So the community was able to participate in getting some initial paint on the wall. On June 12th, we're going to be doing kind of phase 2, and there's going to be some more artwork up there. we want to have the community help paint the freedom jars that are going to be located on the lower part of the mural. So there'll be some more info coming out on that. But yeah, so far it's just been, helping to lay some base coat, and then the 12th we'll have some more volunteers out there helping.
Outstanding. All right. Well, thank you, Matt. And again, we're really fortunate to have you leading this project for us. And I'm just super excited about it. Not just because my wife's going to be on there. I would be excited anyway, but that's a little extra for me. So, all right. So now I want to talk to Judy Smith and Dottie Seldon Stone to tell us about the renaming of Goodwin Green. And Goodman Green is a green that actually is the property of the first church that is leased by the town. So let me start with Judy. Judy, tell us a little bit about how it came about, the renaming of Goodman Green to Unity Green.
Thank you, Earl. I'm really glad people could join us and start learning some of the history that we've learned this last year. The strip of green in front of the church, which most people don't pay too much attention to, it has an historical marker on it, naming it Goodman Green. It is owned by the church, and the town has leased it from the church since 1924. The green was deeded to the church by Timothy Goodman in 1747, and we have a copy of the deed at the church, and you'll hear that Dottie Goodman, Seldon Stone also has a copy of that that deed in her family's history. In any event, most of us just saw it as a piece of green space and not much more. Last year that changed. And it was partially because of witness stones, and it was very much because of Adrienne Billings-Smith and her group with the Concerned Parents of Color of West Hartford. They looked at that historic marker and said, this doesn't feel right. So that raised the question initially to the town. And when the church heard about it, we said, we're the ones who technically own that land. We really should be the ones talking about this and learning about it. Now, I'd like to tell you a little bit of a backstory in that the church, which was founded in 1713 as the fourth parish of the Congregational Church out of Hartford, it has records in its archives that were helping the Witness Stones Project since its inception, and very much invested in learning more about what's going on. And so we had people who were at the Witness Stones Project last year getting introduced to Adrienne Billings-Smith and just learning more about this concern about the green strip. We met with Adrienne and some others via Zoom. Our church had many meetings via Zoom this past year. And we learned about their concern, and Adrienne articulated a vision that the Concerned Parents of Color West Hartford had for that piece of property and proposed the name of Unity Green. At that point, we at the church said, let's take this under advisement. I mean, we're Congregationalists. That's what we tend to do. And one of our members, a former historian for the church, Barbara Lewis, put together a presentation about the enslavement of Native Americans and African Americans in our town and region. She started from, the very beginning of the settlements and went through all of the Indian Wars in Connecticut. And we learned some very difficult pieces of history that we probably should have learned in our youth, but of course, it wasn't part of the curricula. So that helped provide the context for this request. And we talked as a congregation about the name and had a lot of different ideas of what it should be. But what was overriding was the fact that we want the space to be welcoming. Our church is a welcoming church. In fact, every Sunday we start our services with whoever you are and wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. And we really fully believe that to be true. So this space had to be welcoming, and that was the goal. At a congregational meeting at the end of November, we, again via Zoom, we determined and we agreed that the name would be Unity Green. And we supported the vision that had been put together by a smaller group. And the vision is Unity Green will inspire conversation, collaboration, contemplation and celebration of what community means by telling stories of the land, acknowledging the past, and embracing the diverse and rich culture of West Hartford. It was important to us to recognize the past, understand the present, and also be as welcoming and diverse into the future. So with that, we affirmed the name of Unity Green, and that will be celebrated and dedicated on June 20th, the second part of the Juneteenth weekend. On June 20th, at our normal Sunday service at 10 a.m., our minister, Reverend Erica Avina, will be preaching based on a sermon that our third minister of the church, Reverend Nathan Perkins, gave in 1812. I hope you're able to listen in. We are live streaming it. You just have to go to our website, whfirstchurch.org, and get to the sermons and follow along if you're unable to be there in person. It's a powerful sermon, and the fact that it focuses, among other things, on the problems of enslaving people is just terribly relevant for the time. So I hope that you'll be there. And if you have any questions about doing archival work yourself, I encourage you to visit our John P. Webster Library it's on the floor just below the sanctuary. That library and archives provides a wealth of information about the community of West Hartford going back 350 years.
So, you said something that really resonates with me because I feel so strongly about, one, people getting educated and not necessarily having to always be so proactive to get it, because so much of our education comes because it's just what we have to do to pass tests and get grades. But you talked about how it was, I think you might have used the word painful, or at least uncomfortable, maybe to learn some of the things that we learned. But it's led to such an amazing place, the Unity Green and the mission that you talked about. Just tell us more about how the church got that information, reconciled that information, maybe a little of the inside story about how you contemplated and ultimately got to the conclusion.
The interesting part about it is that when it came to our attention, I think we went through a couple of issues of, really? Are you sure? And, questioning things along those lines, but recognizing that the history was likely to be the case. We weren't questioning the history per se. It just was, that's not the portion that, we knew and had been told. So because of the Witness Stones Project, we learned that the first minister, when he arrived at the church, and I'll try to stay out of the deeper church, history of at least the parts that I know. He was there a number of years, and by the time he retired, he did, in fact, own, I believe it was, one slave. Now, maybe there's some more that haven't been uncovered, but that was a question of surprise. The second minister was from a wealthy family and was called to the church to be the minister directly out of seminary, and he arrived with as a landed, I would call landed gentry, for lack of a better term. And with him, he owned slaves. Now, he died very early, in his early 30s, I believe. And then the third minister, Nathan Perkins, and from then on, none of the ministers owned slaves. But that was news to us. And it was uncomfortable realizing that your ministers who were preaching the gospel, the Bible, and all of that, we should know better than that. When you talk about the story of Jacob and Joseph down in Egypt and all of that, it's like, what's wrong with this picture? So we had to learn to accept that. I won't say that we embraced it, but you asked the question of sort of the inside story. The inside story was a little bit of surprise, acceptance, and quickly saying, okay, that's the history, but what's the now? And so we were able to move on. And the difficult thing was that Nathan Perkins, the minister whose sermon will be the basis for the June 20th service, he had to preach to all of these congregants, many of them who were slaveholders. So if you tune into that service, I encourage you to think about what it means to be preaching that service and that sermon, looking at people in your pews who pay your salary and delivering the message that he was delivering. So we had, with Barbara Lewis's presentation, we learned how extensive enslavement was. The Native Americans who were from Connecticut, who after an Indian war with the Pequots were essentially sent, well, they were definitely sent down to the Caribbean estates or plantations or whatever they were called, and enslaved. That was before we had other people of color here being enslaved. And so learning about what people were doing to each other and the types of wars that were happening in this space. And then after they calmed down, people came out and formed the grist mill and started developing West Hartford. But it was on the backs, really not on the backs, it was on the graves in many ways of these persons. So we learned an awful lot. I mean, much more than just the witness stones. And it didn't take long to say that it was just happenstance that Timothy Green's name was on the green. And one question that came up was, well, who are we to rename it, because who named it first? That was a big question. And interestingly, Tracy Wilson, who has this book, Life in West Hartford, in the front and in the back of it, there are maps. And you can take a look at it and find out that in 1776, it was just called the parade ground, because that's what Timothy Goodman called it. It was a piece of property he didn't want to fence in. It was in front of the church. Church was in a different location slightly, but it was still part of the church. Let's just give it to the church and have it be a parade ground forever. And that's why it's open space and will remain an open space. That's what the deed says. That's what we're required to do. And then about 100 years later, there were a series of maps over the 100 years that were pulled together. So by 1896, that space was somehow named Goodman Green. Nobody knows who named it, other than the fact that that was the person who deeded the property to the church. And when William Hall of William H. Hall fame, when he put together a number of maps into one map, that was the name. So the church, once they decided that, hey, it's ours, it's our deed, and we think going forward it needs to be a welcoming name, it was a very easy and fairly quick discussion that we said, we want to do this. Did it on November 29th and started planning for what could be done to let the community know maybe as early as January for MLK Day. But now the bigger celebration is on June 20th, where there'll be a dedication out after the church service.
Well, I'll tell you, Judy, I find that story to be totally inspirational, because it shows how dealing with these uncomfortable truths doesn't have to be something that we have to be ashamed of, but instead can be something that we build upon. In fact, my experience is I learn more from what went wrong sometimes than what went right. And you guys have really, really taken something that I would say has gone wrong and turned it into something that is really, really right. And then switching over to Dottie, Seldon Stone, who really has a wonderful story about dealing with potentially what I might characterize, right or wrong, as an uncomfortable truth. Dottie, please tell us your story about how this information became known to you and the impact that it had in your participation in supporting the renaming of Goodman Green.
Sure. I come to the renaming of Goodman Green, like Earl says, with a very personal story and a personal connection to the green. My great, 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 great grandfather was Timothy Goodman, who donated the land to the church for the town green, or the town parade ground. Growing up in West Hartford, I heard all family stories of the Goodmans and their public spirit and involvement Not only Timothy Goodman with his gift, but also his son Moses, who was a soldier in the Revolutionary War. And Moses delivered an enormous sum of money, $30,000, that was donated by the townspeople of the West Hartford division to George Washington at the winter encampment at Valley Forge. And he carried the money in his saddlebags. And my Aunt Rilla Seldon had the saddlebags at her house. Now they're at the Noah Webster house. But these stories made me feel proud and really connected to West Hartford. But in all the time growing up and ever since, there were no stories of any enslaved workers on the Goodman farm, never any mention of enslaved people living and working in West Hartford. Now, fast forward to February 2020 and a trip to Montgomery, Alabama, where I visited the Lynching Memorial, which is a sacred space dedicated to reflecting on racial terrorism, and also the Legacy Museum there, which is an incredible documentation of slavery and its legacy. And both these sites were conceived by Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative. And I was fortunate enough to hear a talk or attend a talk by Brian Stevenson. And he was asked, what can we do about making change today in respect to racism? And his message was so simple. He said, we need to change the narratives that sustain racial injustice, and change the narrative, change the stories that we tell, change our understanding of the role of enslaved people and all people of color, the role they've played in our country. So several weeks after I came back from that trip, I learned through the witness stones in the church that my great-great-great-great-grandfather actually owned slaves. That was quite a blow. How could that be? I'm saying to myself. And I was really shaken by it. And then I heard about the movement in West Hartford to change the name of Goodman Green and broaden its purpose from a passive open space to a place that embraces the history of all the people that lived and worked in West Hartford. And I was surprised and also, a little saddened. It was kind of hard to digest. But as I struggled with it and tried to understand my own reaction to this slave ownership so close to home, Brian Stevenson's words really came back to me. Change the narrative. Tell the stories of all the voices, all the colors, all the nationalities, and tell the complete history that made West Hartford the town that we know and live in today. So Unity Green will do that. It will tell the stories of all the West Hartford kids and their families, and they'll hear them and read them. And then each one will be able to picture himself or herself and their family as included. And hopefully they'll feel that really important sense of belonging to our town. So to me, it's a really, really important and fantastic project, and I'm so glad it's happening.
Dottie is my friend and my neighbor, and as you guys can tell, it's hard not to love Dottie. Dottie, tell me, you talk about the stories, and I totally believe that. The information you have available to you, whether you sought it out or it just was forced upon you, changes your perspective. This is a tough question, but had you not gone relatively recently to Alabama and saw the the lynching memorial and heard the words of Bryan Stevenson, can you imagine for me what might your thought process have been? Because it must be hard if somebody wants to take your family's name and take it away. I can only imagine there's got to be a bit of a defensiveness of your family, or reconciling that. But had you not had that information to help with your thought process, what might have been the difference?
Well, I think it would have taken me a little longer to process and join in. I mean, I've always been very concerned and searching out, concerned with racism and not wanting it, wanting to solve the issue. But I am so grateful that I had that experience, and I had already read Bryan Stevenson's book, Just Mercy, but he didn't talk so much about in that book about how to resolve, what to do today other than, educate. So I think it was just sort of a miracle that all that came together in my experience. And I'm sure it would have taken a lot more talking with other family members rather than, I started going around telling my family, well, this is what we're going to do, instead of asking them, like, what do you think? So,
well, I asked that question because I was sitting here thinking while you were talking about the impact that Bryan Stevenson and the lynching memorial had on you, and asking myself, what impact will it have when people come to West Hartford and see 19 plus 22 stones that recognize enslaved African people and tell their story? Yeah. And people walk by the mural and see a combination of a national figure put together with the local figures of West Hartford. And when they hear the sermon at Goodman Green, at the First Church, and they go to Unity Square and they are inspired by the things, who else's thinking is going to change because of the things that are happening in West Hartford right now because of the people that are on this panel? Your story might foretell, what is going to become of the great work that the people on this panel are doing. So thank you for that. It's just a bit of a testimonial, I think, that will resonate around what's going on here and then what's going to happen on June 19th. Well, we're going to bring it to a close here shortly. I just want to give the panelists, just because so many amazing things were talked about, a chance. Is there anything else that you want to make sure we get across before we close it out?
I'm even more fired up after listening to everybody speak. This has just been incredible. Yeah. Yeah.
Adrienne, you're on mute.
I agree. I just wanted to tell everyone the times of the day so the Witness Stones Project installation starts at 10 a.m. at the Old Center Cemetery. The community picnic starts at 12 noon. And then we will move over to the MLK mural at 2:30 and have a celebration and speakers. As Matt was saying, it is the Journey to Freedom. It kind of inspired the mural and the individuals that are on there, and the other things that Corey Payne will come up with. And this entire thing, the Juneteenth weekend, is an entire community effort, from our town to our libraries to private citizens, my organization, WHAASCO, the First Church, Noah Webster House. I want everyone to know that so many people have put so much effort and work and passion into this event this weekend. And I just want to thank all of you for doing that, because it means the world to me. But as everyone has stated, the kids in this town and the families in this town, as Earl stated, people getting an entire different perspective about our town when they walk through it and they see different things that are happening, and it's a visual that's going to be there forever. And I just think that speaks so much to the progress of West Hartford, and I am so grateful for that.
Yeah, thank you, Adrienne. So it's been a privilege to facilitate a discussion with these panelists. As you can tell, they're doing wonderful things for our community. It's always a privilege to work with Jen Matos and the Noah Webster House and West Hartford Historical Society, as well as with West Hartford Community Interactive, which I just think is a treasure for our community that allows us to have these kind of discussions and have them replayed in our community. Again, Juneteenth on the 19th. I will tell you that the menu from Doro Group will include sweet tea, sweet potato pie, and chicken that you can choose your spice. So you can get your order in. I think it's on the town's communications, and it's going to be a wonderful event. And again, like I said, 25 years ago in West Hartford, and then you could go back all the way to the stories we're telling about enslaved people. West Hartford is evolving. It continues to evolve, and there continues to be tons of opportunity. But this is a great time to be part of the West Hartford community and to see the progress that the town is making and the people that we have in our community. So once again, thank you to all the panelists. I think it's been a wonderful educational and inspirational discussion. And thank you for everyone who joined.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.